They got Mack Brown at number 4, ahead of Dave Doeren at NC State at number 5. If you're listening on the podcast, you're not watching it on YouTube, here's what the CBS Sports rank of Mack Brown says. It's hard to assess where things really stand with modern Mack Brown. He is one of the few active coaches with the national champion to his name, and he has a Heisman Trophy candidate in Drake May leading his offense at quarterback. The Tar Heels have even made it to the ACC championship game last season. Their first appearance is 2015. But that came after a 4-game skid to end the regular season, including a loss to 4-win Georgia Tech that had an interim coach. North Carolina's defense looked hapless at times, and Brown's decision to stick with defensive coordinator Gene Chizik seems questionable. Although I disagree with that. The unit's improvement determines North Carolina's ceiling. I do agree with that. What I do have a problem with is that they've got Dave Doeren behind Mack Brown. And yes, there's an ACC championship appearance in there, but that goes back to divisions, and somebody has to represent the Coastal Division. I'm simply going on results at this point. And so far, including the last 2 seasons where Dave Doeren had 5 different quarterbacks and 5 different wins, including the last one there with Ben Finley against North Carolina, I would say that Dave Doeren's probably doing a better job with what he's got at NC State versus what they've been doing at North Carolina and the results to go with it.
Well, and let's go facts here. We talked about this earlier. Dave Doeren, Dave Clawson have built programs. They're decade plus in now. And they have reason for optimism every year in Winston-Salem and now reason for optimism every year in Raleigh. There may be a dip. Sure, that's college football. But in all honesty, there are questions about NC State that you have discernible answers to going into 23.
Sure.
The questions you have with North Carolina, you need to see. You have some idea, but do you have an answer? I think at NC State, you have answers. You just got to execute it.
Yeah.
At Carolina, you got to find out who that answer is going to be formulated with. And I think that's a bigger difference. And I'll go back to this. Carolina's schedule is harder than NC State's. NC State has a little bit different run-up this year. Plus, again, we're investing a lot on the Robert Anae, Brennan Armstrong partnership.
Yes.
And I think that's going to be one of the really interesting things to find, in addition to who steps forward with NC State in terms of running the ball and catching the ball. It's funny. Same Carolina. Remember those Carolina questions? You had Josh Downs and Antoine Green last year who caught somewhere in the neighborhood of 2/3 of every ball that Drake May threw, right? And now with Brennan Armstrong, you know he's electric. But when Devin Leary was healthy and even when MJ Morris showed flashes, you kind of knew who might catch the football. At NC State, those guys have to step forward this year.
They do. Here's NC State's schedule. They start at UConn, of all things.
Well, UConn's applying for an auxiliary ACC membership this year in football.
Have they? This is a deep cut. Have they sent any gift baskets to Charlotte for inclusion in the ACC?
That is really a deep cut, by the way.
Look it up. That was a thing that actually happened. Yeah, they host Notre Dame, VMI, and then you send their schedule and which one's a little bit more difficult. I guess it does come down to how things play out down the stretch. At Wake Forest is not easy for NC State ever. Going to Lane Stadium, not an easy thing. And of course, the rivalry game against North Carolina, it doesn't really matter how these teams are playing at that point in the year. All bets are off in that game. So I get your point on the schedule, but back to the Anae Brennan Armstrong situation. I guess I was reading this I don't have the magazine on me, but I guess what Athlon had made the point, like, you had a transfer portal situation, right? Where like Anae he goes off and Brennan Armstrong doesn't have the same magic without his offensive coordinator. Now they're pairing back up. Let's see if that magic can happen. All that stuff is all relevant. To me, it comes down to, is Dave Doeren going to actually follow through on modernizing or changing the offense? Okay. Last year, we spent a lot of time talking about the Wolfpack and Devin Leary and what they had or did not have. And while there was legitimate complaints or criticisms about the wide receiver group last year not stepping up and creating issues of separation, we also understood Devin Leary was a lot more hurt than he was leading on in the surgeries he had this offseason. And now he's going to be at Kentucky, and nothing but the best for Devin Leary. He's a good dude. But there was a lot of complaints about how they went about winning football games. And I sat here and I pounded the table saying, y'all, this is the feature. It's not a bug. NC State wants to win games ugly. They want to win games defensively. If they walk out of their 13-10, that's what they want to do. That's what they feel they're capable of doing. All right, so You make the change at offensive coordinator. You have a different quarterback in Brennan Armstrong. What was the biggest knock on Devin Leary? Why was he not considered a top ACC guy despite the fact he put up good numbers heading into last season? Well, because he was a one-way quarterback. He wasn't a two-way quarterback. And we joked about it with him too. Like, hell, have you considered running a little bit more to get some love? And he laughed it off. But that was a real, not a criticism, but the way we looked at quarterbacks in the ACC, Devin was decidedly old school, whereas Brennan Armstrong isn't. And we get back to the running game. I feel like Brennan Armstrong is going to be a featured part of this running game.
I agree.
And that's ultimately going to open up this offense a little bit more because they had such a hard time establishing the run last year that Armstrong's going to have to be critical to that if they're going to get any passing game going that NC State fans want to see.
Yeah, I think that Armstrong is obviously a featured piece in what they do, both throwing and running, right?
Yes.
However, let me say this. You wouldn't have brought Robert Anae in there to be your offensive coordinator if you weren't going to change your model.
I would hope so.
Because Robert Anae is one way.
Yeah.
There's a lot of 11 personnel, and he will move guys all over the place. And you know this from his Virginia days, and Tony Elliott, bless, tried to adapt some of that last year.
Yeah.
It just didn't quite take. And Des Kitchings was there, and Tony and Des were familiar with a lot of different things together. But the Keaton Thompson, we haven't seen who the Keaton Thompson at NC State is this year. There'll be somebody that'll be like Keaton Thompson. And the tight ends will play much bigger roles, much more pronounced roles. I think NC State's going to be fine offensively. Here's the secret sauce for NC State. In my mind, everybody talks about who they don't have on defense, but look at who played last year in backup support roles and played a lot of football that is on that roster. That, to me, is the part of NC State now that you actually have some investment in long-term, where no matter how many guys, they lose 8 starters in a year, Joe, you don't feel as bad about it because they have played with depth now. And that kind of goes back to our Florida State-Clemson discussion. The guys that Clemson replaces guys with have played. The guys that Florida State is replacing guys with and backups, I don't know how much they've played. At Clemson, at NC State, to a degree, even with Carolina defensively. And it's one of the reasons I would be a little bullish on Louisville emerging here, because I think Louisville's got guys that have played. It's going to be interesting to see how big a factor that is as we get going in this season, because I think it's a game changer for 2 or 3 schools, to be honest with you.